Green infrastructure is important on every aspect of urban occupation. I think it's particularly important when we start to think about the future. We start to think about low energy buildings, health and well-being, the move away from our dependency of very controlled environments, for example, cars, public transport, houses, office working. As we move into a lower energy future, the things that are going on outside will have a much bigger impact on the stuff that's going on inside.
My concern at the moment is that green infrastructure doesn't really encapsulate the indoor environment. So I would like to see that being brought into the discussion as well. Our research currently is looking at airborne pollution as it affects the indoor environment from both outdoor and indoor sources, and then what the consequent health impacts are as a result of that. Because if you think about it, where do you spend most of your time? You get on a bus, you get on a train, you get on a tube, you spend your time in the office, you spend your time at home. Now, in developed countries generally, people tend to spend up to about 90% of their time in indoor environments.
I've been looking at carbon monoxide in particular as a pollutant that is a kind of tracer for air pollution in general, and been monitoring carbon monoxide in streets, in offices, in houses, using a variety of different methods, and also looking at what the effect is on people. There's been quite a lot of discussion about whether the presence of green infrastructure can reduce air pollution in general, and things like if you put trees in or if you put green roofs on buildings, whether that will reduce air pollution for the population. It's really difficult to prove whether it's true. So you can put a green roof on a building and you can hope that that's going to reduce air pollution in the area, but generally the buildings are quite small and the air pollution problem is quite big. So an individual building might make a difference, but it's quite difficult to prove.
I'm interested in the way form influences building performance, but I'm also interested in the way building form influences its surroundings. The street we're looking at is Eldon Street, just off Moorgate. There's an awful lot of pedestrian traffic and an awful lot of vehicle traffic. And the form of the street itself seems to be creating some really interesting air patterns. So the air seems to be recirculating in the street. The south side of the street is higher than the north side of the street. So the airflow skims over the top of the canyon, which means that the air cannot be pulled down into the street to help vent it. So we're trying to devise ways to actually see if we can visualize how air moves in the street, just looking at that interaction between buildings and the urban environment. And what does that mean exactly? What can we learn from that?
We had some funding to look at how trees affect air movement within streets. The concept would be that streets with big trees in reduce airflow through that street. So if you need airflow to clear the pollutants out of the street, then that could be an issue. In winter, no leaves on the trees, nice freezing cold wind, and that should in theory blow the particles away, but trees without leaves on aren't necessarily green infrastructure.
Do we just want to live in these kind of sterile environments where we don't have any sunlight, we don't have any fresh air, that we just move from one box to another in a very controlled environment, or do we want to move around freely and openly? Not trying to regenerate a rural environment inside an urban environment, but taking some of the more pleasant aspects of those and mixing them together. We need to stop thinking about the building as if it ends at the building envelope, but how it transcends into the urban environment and how the urban environment extends into the building itself.
So it seems to me absolutely essential that we start talking in terms of not just green infrastructure and the outdoor environment, which has an impact indoor, but actually treating indoor environments as places and spaces in their own right. Now, a very good example of that I've seen recently would be an office refurbishment which was done down in Carter Lane, where what they've done is used sustainability criteria to inform the design, but they've gone beyond that. So they've used something called the World Building Standard. So what the World Standard does now is actually medicalise design, and it actually looks at the whole spectrum of well-being in terms of indoor pollution, in terms of social reactions. So this entire building is built around a whole concept of people's well-being, It's going to reduce absenteeism, people are going to want to come in work, it's a more productive environment.
We're always very interested in talking to anybody about how they think that this can be moved forward. I think we're at a very exciting time. We're at the beginning of a conversation. We've kind of gone through the shock phase of we need sustainability to get on.
Probably mapping up of trees, the sizes of the trees, what time of year they lost the leaves and what time of year they get the leaves back. Those would be quite interesting areas to work with communities to get some more data and maybe do some modelling around how air pollution varied around trees in streets.